Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources Podcast, the BERcast. We got episode 11, where we are going to be speaking with our colleague Paul Gay with US-Ecologic about the updated RESNET Sampling Protocol. I'm rolling into segment one all by myself, flying solo this time because my good buddy Sandy Gallo is stuck in Virginia. He was out there for the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance's membership meeting, and in Virginia, unfortunately, his flight got delayed not once but twice, and so he is unable to make it. It's been way too long since we had an episode, so we're just go ahead and roll this one out. Starting off with segment number one, where we talk about news that's going on in the industry. We have some pretty interesting things that have happened here within the last couple months. But one of the most important things is that the HUD and USDA standards for building are being updated. And that accounts for potentially up to 1 in 4 homes are purchased by people that are either going to be using HUD-based programs or FHA and USDA. So this means that a lot of builders that are in states that otherwise may have energy codes that are a little bit further behind may have to go ahead and build to the 2021 IECC anyways, in order to ensure that they can sell their buildings to any eligible buyer who may be using some of these federal programs for purchasing them. So the way that works is that basically the standards are based off the 2021 IECC. That's kind of a big deal. I mean, if you're building in a 2009 IECC state, and basically all of a sudden you have to build your house to the 2021, that could be a really big change for a lot of builders. I'm thinking about a place like take Michigan, my home state. We're on an amended version of the 2015 IECC that, frankly speaking, in a lot of ways looks a lot more like the 2009, especially when it pertains to performance compliance. So here in Michigan, we still got builders building with 2x4 walls, R13, sometimes R15, but still, the 2021 IECC prescriptively, at the very least, mandates having R20 plus 5 continuous in climate zone 5 or R20 plus 10 continuous in climate zone 6. These are some big updates that a builder would have to make. I mean, amongst many, many others, don't get me wrong. Now, the devil's in the details about how this is going to be actually rolled out. There's some questions about how are the builders going to document this? Are they just sort of signing off to say that they did? Or is there actually going to be a verification process? This probably warrants its own episode at some point because it's just that important. But we're going to kind of keep you posted. But for right now, this is kind of a big deal. The fact that a lot of homes that will go through, FHA mortgages, things like that, are going to have to meet the 2021 IECC, and for multifamily, potentially 90.1 2019. It's kind of a big deal. And it's going to, I think, especially when you get into those bigger buildings, where builders have a lot on the line for financing, multifamily, it's, we may even say that that's probably the market that's going to end up being impacted the most. But frankly speaking, I need more information on this. I think bringing on some advocates who know a little bit more about this from a policy standpoint will make a lot of sense. The other big thing that happened here is that the DOE updated its efficiency standards for water heaters, and in particular, the impact is updating for electric storage water heaters and essentially pushing them up to the levels that are mandatory for heat pump water heaters. So in essence, heat pump water heaters are going to replace most residential grade electric water heaters. So that's a big deal because, electric water heaters are still very affordable for builders to put in. They're simple for builders to put in. They cost the consumer a lot of money because electricity is expensive. And so boosting this to heat pump water heaters it's going to make a big difference for consumers. But I think there's going to be some more thoughtful design that has to go into this. The standards also have some updates for gas-fired, oil-fired, and larger storage electric water tanks. Honestly, in order to get the kind of the full scope of what is happening with this, you kind of have to go into some um, federal registrars of standards updates, and it's pretty pithy, kind of very focused reading. So at some point, maybe we'll get a cheat sheet that comes out that kind of tells us exactly what happened and what's changing. This isn't happening overnight. It's going to take some years to implement, but similar to what we saw with the DOE updating furnace standards. Basically, we talked about that a handful of episodes ago. You can't have 80% furnaces anymore. You're going to have condensing furnaces here. I believe it was in 2028. So, we're going to have some new water heater standards here very soon, and that's going to be helping to, incrementally improve our HERS scores and really deliver some savings for the consumer. So that's something I'm very excited about. I don't have my buddy Sandy to rap with here. Normally, he and I would do the whole push and pull thing. Can't do that today because he's on the road flying. So we're just going to go ahead and roll into segment 2, our guest segment right now. Okay, rolling into the guest segment here for the BERcast. And we've got Paul Gay from US-Ecologic. Paul is the multifamily programs manager with US-Ecologic. And we invited him on because he's been involved in the rewriting of the RESNET sampling protocol here for the last several years. It's been a long process, and we're finally to the point where the standard is done and it's been released, and it's anticipated to go into effect here for all projects permitted as of July 1st, 2024. Paul, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure. Great to be here.
Awesome. And in addition to Paul, we actually have Matt Rosendaul with Building Efficiency Resources. Matt, many of you all who may work with BER as your provider may have spoken to Matt about some technical questions that you might have about the rating industry. He's also created some really fantastic shorts about kind of the nuances of being a rater. So check those out on YouTube. And he has also got a woodworking channel on YouTube as well. He is a master of the lathe, I hear. Is that correct?
I don't know about being a master of the lathe, but I sure make an awful lot of sawdust. Yeah, I like doing that. That's what I'm between that and collecting mechanical watches. Those are my other side things. When I'm not running a blower door test, I'm making sawdust or working on a watch.
Yeah, we all have our nerdy proclivities, and woodworking, that's a pretty cool one. Watch collecting, that's a new one. I didn't know about that. Paul, you got any what's your nerdy habit aside from all this stuff?
Nerdy habit, I just like collecting stuff. I kind of get into something like latest was Swiss Army knives was something I just, you buy one, then you end up buying 20 before you know it. You're looking for the perfect one. But yeah, reading a lot, books. I don't know.
Just Sandy's a big reader too. He can commiserate with that.
Hobby kind of thing.
Okay. Well, for those who don't know, my nerdy habit is I designed and installed a disc golf course here in the city of Detroit. I'm not very good at playing. I'm just okay, but I helped to get Detroit's first disc golf or frisbee golf course installed. So any of y'all who are discers, I know that a few of you all are. So come out to Detroit and let's go play around one of these days. But getting down to business here, Paul. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and US-Ecologic and your role there. And then, let's maybe turn to this sampling standard.
Yeah, so I've been with US-Ecologic 16 years. We're kind of a HERS rated lead provider, kind of any above code and code provider for all that kind of work. And we do all the inspections, all the testing, plan reviews, design reviews, kind of soup to nuts, turnkey operation in mainly single family production, single family and multi-family developers, large scale developers through the whatever program their choice is. Whatever rebates are out there, we try and find those and get them through the certification process. My particular role, I'm a HERS QAD, lead QAD, so I kind of live in the multi-family world on the lead and the RESNET and the Energy Star side of it. That's kind of where I play my games, play ball. So, mainly multi-family.
Okay. And with that being said, how has sampling been a big part of US-Ecologic's process here over the years? Both single family and multifamily, or really just multifamily, or?
It's really, really just multifamily. A single family, we kind of split it, two houses kind of thing. With single family, they don't sample anything. Whatever program, 100% inspections. Multifamily, we definitely sample. A lot of our projects are the larger 250, 300, 350 unit projects. So we got a sample. We always have done. So yeah, it's a big part, and just trying to keep. It's one of those things. I think people understand sampling, then they realize they don't, and you have to keep explaining it. That's kind of why we come up with a new process to help. Hopefully, the goal is that it just streamlines a lot of the common roadblocks or misunderstandings that people got, especially on failures. I think is a big thing. We just wanted to kind of streamline it and make it easier for everyone.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. It seems like sampling for single family homes in a lot of ways is falling out of favor here to a certain extent. It sounds like we're kind of, as an industry, kind of saying maybe that is not the best idea. Energy Star, EPA's Energy Star program, at the very least, decided that wasn't necessarily the best idea. And so the EPA is in the process of basically sunsetting the application of sampling for single family homes. But that leaves multifamily, where arguably the sampling process and economies of scale, I think, make a lot more sense. I think that we could argue about whether or not it's even the best thing for multifamily or not either. But here's the deal. At the end of the day, what we're kind of saying is that given the consistent footprint of the plans and the general contractor and the tradespeople, there tends to be more consistency in multifamily job site to job site than what you might have in a single family world. And I would also say that some of the kind of the sweet spot of the things that we're really trying to take advantage of with sampling in multifamily, duct testing and blower door testing and ventilation testing, those things that take some time. Here's the deal. It turns out that the envelope loads in multifamily dwelling units are not actually that big of a deal compared to all the other loads. So it's not to say that we couldn't make some mistakes and all of a sudden, an apartment dweller, their ducts are disconnected and they're really losing a lot of, energy through that into, some interstitial space or an attic space even, God forbid. But in general, I think that, the concept is that there's enough continuity within the construction process and uniformity in multifamily to the point where continuing on with sampling makes sense. And it's sort of a value added to all parties. It's a value added to the developers who pursue energy rating services, as well as the rating companies themselves that have to go out and perform these services. Paul, do you agree with that? I mean, I'm assuming that you do, given that you just spent the last several years of your life helping to draft this standard.
Yeah, the continuity is the big thing. It's what you see. It's going to be the same mistakes and issues that you run into repeatedly, and so after a while, you kind of come to expect. You know what to expect, and the goal then is to address those issues before they become issues, and then hopefully, the sampling protocol, the process is pretty smooth. Ideally speaking, it rarely is, but you become familiar with what potentially you're going to hit. It becomes common to make sure air sealing's done right, make sure the trades understand what grade 1 looks like and what it is. Make sure the ducts are going to be set up where they're going to pass the test. So that was kind of what was baked into the new process with the training set.
Yeah, so that verifier set, the first set of 5. Yeah, that's which is something probably that I know I as a rater when I was in the field was doing that kind of stuff anyway, just doing kind of a first recon practice run, not starting sampling yet, just going out and doing some rough-in duct leakage testing and this and that, and putting some eyes on the project and saying, hey, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem, and doing all of that recon before you get to final. Because when you get to final, or even sometimes when you get to pre-drywall, you've got such a long list, and everybody's already moved on to another building or another floor. So yeah, that practice set I think is necessary for the process in order to catch that, so that you get consistency in things done right instead of consistency in things done wrong.
Yeah, you can cut and trying to explain that in a trade. We do like trailer training as well, and that only goes so far. But or it's in the plans and you can point it out, it's in the plans. But when you can get there and show them this is what it looks, because you want them to say this is what looks well, this is what you've done well, but also this is where you're going to hit a problem. If we don't kind of turn left, you're going right, we want to go left. If we do that now, your life is going to be so much easier, to say, trying to fix problems when you've got people moving in and moving trucks. Then it's way too late.
And the whole idea of sampling is to do less, that it's not as much work, and so by being able to head that stuff off, you're kind of keeping the spirit of the process by making it less work, by finding those problems early.
So for those who don't know, Matt was actually one of the more prolific energy raters in the state of Michigan for 10 to 15 years.
About 15.
So he's since retired down south, and he's just working part-time helping out good old BER, and we appreciate him doing that here. But Matt was very influential, and I'm from Michigan, as y'all didn't know. I've run my mouth enough about my Detroit fandom and being from my hometown here. But Matt and I knew each other back when he was kind of like one of the godfathers sort of the Michigan HERS industry. And, I know that multifamily started to become something that I think all of us paid closer attention to and had more opportunities for, probably about 10 to 15 years ago, really. And, prior to that, the application of multifamily to HERS ratings of multifamily, there really wasn't a whole lot of energy for that. But, especially with a lot of affordable housing plans basically calling for, a energy efficiency program to be applied, that really pushed programs like Energy Star to say, well, this is a homes program, but we could apply this to certain size multifamily buildings. And so all of a sudden it went from, single family homes and townhouses up to 3-story buildings. And then there was like, well, what about these 5-story buildings that are still pretty similar to that 3-story building? How about that? Okay, well, I guess we'll allow that too. And from all that, kind of came a need to really look more holistically at what are we doing here? And there was a set of multifamily guidelines that was published by ResNet about the kind of the application of HERS ratings to multifamily. And Paul, were you involved in that process?
Not in the guidelines when that was born. I think someone from our group was. That was earlier. You're right. That's going, 2009, 2010, 2009. Yeah. I think, that there was a lot of success with the guy that helped clear up and clarify a lot of gaps where people were just kind of like, well, this is what makes sense. We think this is what we should do. And then the guidelines kind of clarified it. Again, it was guidelines. You didn't have to do it. Then there was a big move to take those guidelines and create a multifamily standard. And that's when I got involved. That was around 2015, 2016.
So the idea was we were going to have a separate standard for applying HERS ratings to multifamily. So like you'd almost have like 301 for single family, but then you'd have like, 302 for multifamily or something like that.
Yeah, it was even before. It was going to be, the minimum rate standard for multifamily, completely separate book.
Gotcha.
And that was the plan for about a year, maybe 6 months. Then it was, and there was a lot of stuff going on around that time for ResNet. There was a big push to get into the code books and things like that, and a lot of upgrades and a lot of, here, this program, there's a lot of kind of things we need to fill in and kind of fill in the blanks. 301, 14, and 380, 14 started that, pulling them out, and then the multifamily standard, they got turned into what's now 308, 19, and 30. I get my numbers right. 301, 19, and 380, 19 is what they evolved into. Part of the original, when it was going to be a standard, was let's take an opportunity and look at sampling, because now the sampling standard as it was and as is was written for single family. Let's look at it with fresh eyes from multifamily perspective. And a lot of people in that group obviously had multifamily experiences. The first draft was very much a best practice. Here's all the tips and tricks and things we've learned along the way that would help someone else coming in who's just picking up a multifamily project. These are the best guiding principles to help you succeed at sampling in multifamily. So that was kind of the first draft, which was probably about 30 pages long and covered every kind of nuanced situation you could think of. Then it obviously, well, that's too much. And so then another group come in and kind of looked at it, as I say, it was now moving towards it. Well, now we've got to kind of bring it back to single family and multifamily. So another group come in and looked at it and said, right, we've got to kind of strip this down to the essentials. And that's where, and the journey's taken, it's been, sampling protocol has been kicked around, beaten up, pushed around. Where we are, I think it's gone through 3 rounds of public comment. It's been on a journey. So hopefully what we got, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I think it's ready to go. There's always going to be like a room for improvement. And once we kind of get it out and test it, there'll be some tweaks, but I think the essence of it is enough to get a good sampling program going.
Okay, and I went and popped it up here on the screen here, just for people to be aware of it. As Paul is stating, it's been a long road, and there's been a lot of different ideas of how we may go about the approach of updating this. I can remember, it might have even been my first ResNet conference that I attended. And Darren Waschek was doing the QAD and trainer, sort of powwows that we do, at least used to do back at the ResNet conference, and started talking about sampling and changes that might come. And I asked a lot of questions about how does this pertain to multifamily, and he was like, I want you to be involved in this process. But then he never invited me. So I guess I don't know, I fell out of favor, but that's okay. I'm glad that because it took this long. I'm glad I didn't have anything to do with it. Because that sounds somewhat miserable to have been working on this for as many years as it's taken. But regardless, it's been years and years and years. 2013, things finally got where we got a draft standard to review. It went through multiple rounds of public comment. It was approved not October 17th, 2024, but rather October 17th, 2023. The voluntary compliance date is set at January 1st, 2024. So you can apply this now. Basically, if you have any projects that are pursuing sampling, you can use this updated sampling standard now. The mandatory compliance date is July 1, 2024. With an asterisk. And I'm going to get to that here in a second. But before we get to that, why don't we just talk, Matt? When you saw this, not having been involved in drafting it, but you were involved in the public comment process, what are some things that stood out to you as being some big and impactful changes to this standard?
Well, I think big picture, like stepping back and look at this, from the standpoint of a rater who was in the field, I know that a lot of raters are intimidated by the process, especially a brand new rater. I know some people who have, they've just gotten their certification, they've been doing it for a year or whatever, and they're like, oh, multifamily. And they just, and I remember being in that situation, and I got a call to do my first multifamily project, and it was Enterprise Green Communities rehab project that needed pre and post HERS, 420 units. And I was a one-man show, me and my equipment in a pickup truck. And here's this 420 unit project. But, the bid to do it, even doing sampling, was like $100,000 worth of fees or whatever. I couldn't say no. I had to say yes and figure out how to do it. I just said yes. And and then I worked with my provider. It wasn't Bear at the time. And I said, hey, I want to do this and I need to learn sampling. And at the time that I did that, this didn't exist. So I think, for anything that we have, like when the multifamily guidelines finally came out, it was a breath of relief. And now this being narrowed down and having a standard that we can refer to, I think is a big important thing for people who want to get into sampling. I say to everybody that 95% of what we do in this industry is guided by a standard. There's only about a 5% thing where we've got to use our judgment and training and stuff to make a determination on something. But everything else, 95% of it, we need to have a standard that we can look to say, okay, what do we do in this situation? Here's the standard. And I think this answers that. Of course, for people who are used to the old way of doing sampling, it's a little bit different, but there's a workaround. There's an easy button that we can talk about later. But I think that's the important thing. Just like with the 310 standard, it outlines, here's what you need to do, and this standard I think addresses that for multifamily. The big thing, it removes some of the intimidation.
Okay. Paul, what do you think? What's your big takeaway about the sort of novel enhancements that come out of this updated approach to sampling?
So, again, being involved from the beginning and living in multifamily, this to me, it's just taken it. It makes the process easier, as Matt said. It takes that hopefully takes that intimidation out of it. It's pretty straightforward,
and flexible.
And thank you.
A lot more flexibility, so you're not locked into units because you're doing features. And we can summarize for people who aren't familiar with the thing, but yeah, we're going away from that locked into the unit. And if you go into a unit to test it, and there's the HVAC guys there, we've got the duct system all ripped apart, and you can't test it, don't matter. Go to the one across the hall or next door, or pick another one. There's a lot of flexibility, which is important in a big complicated project like that.
Yeah. So maybe let's take a step back, because for those who weren't all that educated on sampling before, the way that it worked in a nutshell was you had to define first of all, you defined what you were going to be sampling for, and generally speaking, it's the key things were going to be the testing blower door testing, duct leakage testing, ventilation testing. If you're doing Energy Star, maybe some of the other Energy Star related things like bedroom pressure balancing, local mechanical exhaust testing, static pressure, etc. You could also sample for features like all the minimum rated features, lighting efficiency counts. Not that that matters so much anymore given the prevalence of LEDs in the marketplace, but at one point, the percentage of efficient lighting was actually kind of a time consuming and less predictable element of the verification process, appliances, mechanical nameplates, etc. So basically all those things that you could sample for, you had to basically do a sampling qualifying set of 7 units in a row that met whatever your threshold for sampling was. So usually you'd set like a blower door score. I can't be leakier than 0.3 CFM per CFM 50 per enclosure area, for example. Or I can't be leakier than 8% total duct leakage. Or 80% or 80 CFM, whichever is greater. Where would I come up with those numbers? I might come up with them from a program like an Energy Star or a Lead for Homes or something like that. So those would be my thresholds for compliance. I'd have to have 7 in a row that passed without instance of failure before I could move on to actually applying sampling. And by applying sampling, that means basically taking all the rest of the dwelling units, lumping in them to groups of no greater than 7, and then basically you'd have to test at least 1 unit within that group of 7. If it passed basically all the dwelling units in that pass, then you're good to go. If there's a failure, then there was a process of dealing with failures, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what that was because it's kind of old news. We're kind of focused on what this new thing is. But my understanding, the big takeaway is that it's less about grouping per dwelling units, and you have to test every sampling feature. Now you can basically pick sampling features and sort of apply them in sort of separate testing groups. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, it kind of breaks it down per minimum rate feature. Now, and this was a big topic on the group discussion, what that meant. And you can still do it per unit.
Yep.
Absolutely. The flexibility, as Matt said, the flexibility is there. But if something is out of compliance or something isn't installed, you can still move on. As long as every component meets the sampling that you're sampling, meets the rate, then you're good.
So yeah, that's the easy button that I was talking about, because the sampling used to be you had to do 7 in a row as your qualifiers, and then 1 out of 7 for your sample sets. And that 1 out of 7 was like 14% something. Well, now the easy button is to do 10 in a row and then 1 out of 5, which is 20%. And so that's where if somebody is just used to the old protocol and they want to still do it on a per unit basis, they can still do 10 instead of 7 and then 1 out of 5, which is 20%. But if they didn't want to, yeah, it takes it away. The new standard really allows you to, instead of doing the units, you're doing things on feature basis. So you're doing 20% of the blower doors, 20% of the duct leakage, 20% of whatever you want to do sampling on. You're doing 20% of them spread out throughout the building. You have to hit each one of the building model groups and each one of the buildings, and but yeah, it gives you a lot more flexibility instead of being locked into a per unit and everything in that unit has to pass.
Yeah, we have a lot of raters. Some raters, that's what they do. They go and inspect everything in one unit, test everything, inspect everything. Mm-hmm. Others are, okay, today is blower door day, and I'm going to run and gun and hit all my blower doors. And the next day is duct testing, and then another day is inspections. So it gives you that flexibility. How you get there at the end is kind of up to you, as long as you get there at the end.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say as a rater, I probably like that. That sounds like it's going to give me more flexibility. Yeah, okay, so there's a little bit more, arguably there is more sampling involved, right? Because instead of we're doing 1 in 7 before, now we're doing 1 in 5, so kind of the rate goes up a little bit, but it gives me a little bit more flexibility of the application. I got to tell you though, Paul, I don't envy you as a QAD who has to oversee this, because to me, me thinking about being a QAD, I would find this to be perhaps somewhat onerous to really make heads or tails of. The tracking, I think, may get a lot more complicated. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I can only speak that from personal. Our company's invested a lot in software, and our software can filter when our guys go out and they use iPad and they have the electronic inspection forms. And so every time they hit a data point, that funnels into a bucket, and at the end, when I see it, it gets pre-filtered into a spreadsheet. So I guess personally, that hasn't been a problem for me.
So you all are already applying this, I take it.
Yeah, yes, we have. Yeah.
Okay, so you've basically gone for the voluntary compliance date, and you've decided, hey, we're going to go ahead and start using this right away, and you've got a good system for it. Matt, I mean, I guess BER, we're a third party provider, and we don't quite regulate the exact sort of systems that people have to use, and so I don't know if this has come up yet, but I'd say it was complicated to track before anyways. Yeah. Now I feel like in some ways it could get easier, but it could get a lot more sort of complex.
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of standardize the tracking because everybody's going to do their own. Like you, Paul, you guys have your own system that is automatically populating things, and I think every individual rater is going to have their own tracking system. And I'm working on a new version of our sampling tracking worksheet, but it's difficult because instead of tracking units and having sample sets of 7 or less, now it can be what the rater wants to define for what they want to sample, the features, what they're going to sample, what they're going to test 100%. And so everybody's tracking sheet is going to be a little bit different. So yeah, it's going to be hard to standardize the tracking, and to do QA on each one of them is going to be a custom process. Yeah.
Well, Paul, what would you say that you feel like you've talked about some of the enhancements? What do you think is, if you're a rater that's used to the old system, what do you think is maybe the one important catch that may really kind of change their business approach to applying sampling, or maybe writing their contracts with their developers? Is there anything in here that you think it's kind of like, well, don't miss that, because that's really important and that's really going to change things potentially?
So 2 things come to mind. I think we touched on one. The route to entry to sampling has changed. As Matt said, it's now 10 as opposed to 7.
So the qualifying set is 10 in a row without instance of failure. Is that right?
No.
It's
okay.
Go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say it's 5. What we're calling the verified set, because after the builder has 5 instances of whatever feature you want to do the sampling on, they notify the rater can come out and test those. Like maybe it's 5 blower doors. So they can do 5 blower doors, and they can have failures in there, because these are what we're calling the verified set. And those are those practice runs that we talked about to help the builder get on the right track, make sure that everything's right. And so they can have failures in there without penalty of having additional units. It's just that these 5 units have to be done. They all have to pass. They don't have to pass on the first shot, though. They can work with the builder and get them to pass. And then you've got 5 after that are 5 consecutive.
Yeah.
And
training or diagnostic or model units or whatever. I think a lot of them do that anyway. It's the playground. We can kind of see what's working, what isn't. Then you get another 5. Then there's 5 to actually qualify, which is same as the 7 to qualify is now down to 5. So those.
Okay, so basically that initial 5, you could have some goof ups, as long as they're corrected. Then basically, like, what happens if it looks to me like if they pass, then that becomes the qualification set.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a kind of a sticking point, and I'm sure some people will have some comments on that. But as it's written now, no, it's 5. Even if they pass, they don't count. There's going to be another 5 to qualify, as it's written now.
So for all intents and purposes, your qualification set is 10 units instead of 7. You the first 5, which is, I guess, Matt's calling, have some oopsies that get corrected, but then you have to basically have the qualification set has to have 5 in a row that do pass without failure before you move on to sampling. Is that correct?
Yeah. And what the point of that is, you're just setting expectations up early, so everyone's aware of what's going to happen, and then, a little bit of pain up front hopefully is going to make the rest of the process much easier. You're going to be able.
I'll say from my experience, here's the thing, y'all. Apply this standard. I think it's going to be better in the long run, but there's something that transcends all the standards. It's the 5% that Matt was referring to, that the standards really can't tell you what to do. If you get in on these projects, get out there often and get out there early and pay attention to what's going on out there. You got to be on your A game. Look, and with all due respect, I'm glad that everybody's taking advantage of opportunities out there. I hear about a lot of people flying from, Minnesota to Texas to go and do, sampling and stuff like that on multifamily. And look, I'm not going to tell you how to run your business. Some people can figure out how to make that work and still do a good job. Some of y'all, though, I don't know. Some of y'all, I think you're just kind of carpet bagging around. I hate to say it, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think that some of y'all don't have the best process, and you're just kind of, hey, I've got an architect that I work with up here in Minnesota. I'm going to go and do this project that they're working on down in Texas because they like me. That's great. Do a good job. And to do a good job means you have to go on site, and because otherwise there's going to be failures. Paul, you all do some out-of-state work. So do you agree with me that especially when it comes to, just in general on projects, I'd assume you'd agree, but do you agree especially for some of these that are maybe a little bit outside of your neighborhood, you got to really show up often and early? What do you think?
Yeah, whatever problems you get with in-town jobs amplified times 100, it all comes down to communication, early communication, and repeated communication. For those, when you're flying across country, obviously the stakes are a lot higher because there's a lot more expense involved. And the shorter window, you can't just go, oh, I'll come back tomorrow or the next week just to follow up. It's because that's another $1,000. So we struggle a lot. We do a lot of, because we're a nation, nationwide, projects all over the country. So it's something we struggle with, but it all comes down to communication, getting the builder on side, getting them to call you out, and them holding up and them being accountable to their word. Because there's a lot of times we get called out and they're not ready. They swore blind that they were, but they're not. So that's a different subject. But it's all part of the package, though. It's all part of what you wrestle with.
Yeah, and again, I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus for taking advantage of an opportunity and going to make it happen. US-Ecologic is taking on projects all over the country. That's great. They do have sort of regional infrastructure to be able to handle those things, but I'm sure that they got to do some traveling. BER has raters that are taking advantage of opportunities. But I just want to say, from my experience being a QAD, I've seen this stuff kind of go sideways because of a bad plan and not bad intentions. I think that there's a small handful of people that have bad intentions in this industry. I don't think it's most by any means. But I'd say, look, you have to have a good plan, and some of this is going to go beyond what the standard says. Matt, you've been trying to interject here. What's your take?
Well, I wanted to say that, one of the things about boots on the ground and having a field person there often enough. One of the things is the interaction with the subcontractors. I think a lot of raters just deal with a construction super on a project and they don't involve the subcontractor. So when I would go out and do what I'd call my recon, my verified practice runs on stuff, if I'm testing a duct system, I want one of the HVAC guys there while I'm testing this duct system, because when it fails, I'm going to put fog in it, and I don't want to have to run around and try to document where everything is. I want the person who says, oh, these duct systems are all nice and tight. I want to have him standing there when I hook up the fog machine and go, oh, shoot. That's what's important. And the same thing with insulators. When we're doing a pre-drywall, after insulation and pre-drywall, and which is a lot of times done per floor, and I always did 100% pre-drywall. I didn't sample it, but I wanted to be there when the insulators are there. So even if they're done with the third floor and they've worked their way down to the second floor, and I'm up there walking around, and I see things that are not done right, I want to go downstairs and grab one of those guys. So I'm not just walking around with the super. I want a subcontractor to come up, and I can say, hey, you guys need to do something different with this knee wall. You need to do something with this, marriage joint between two modular units, whatever it is, so that we're involving the subcontractor. Because it's the old telephone game. If you tell the construction super, he's going to tell the supervisor of the insulators, and then the supervisor is going to tell the crew leader, and then the crew leader is going to tell the guys. Well, that's that old phone game where all of a sudden it gets lost in that chain. And if you can actually grab the person who's standing there with the spray foam gun and say, take off your mask and come here, boy, it makes a big, big difference. And you can only do that if you're there when they're doing it.
Yeah. And again, that ties back to that pre-qualifying builder set. That's what that's about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Paul, you mentioned there was another thing that you think that people should be aware of as they're approaching implementing this new standard.
Yeah, I did. Now I forgot. I guess the sampling rate has gone up. That's a big one, and to be aware of that. And then the way failures are tracked.
So let's talk about that. We haven't really talked about failures. So how are failures addressed?
So now you've gone through your qualifying set, you're sampling, everything's going great, then you hit a failure, whatever that is, and then now you're basically automatically out of sampling, which sounds bad, but it really isn't. It's all right, so stop. What is the issue? Let's just say it's a blower door was failing. Fix that unit, and now you've got to test another 3 to basically re-qualify. So you fix the one that failed, then add. So your sampling now is, it's gone up. So then it is, again, this is pointing back to making sure everything's getting set up correctly to avoid all these failures.
Oh, okay. So I kind of like that. So basically what you're saying is if there is any failure of a feature, you stop sampling that feature until you've, basically documented 3 in a row that pass again, and that original one that failed is corrected. And then you can start up again. Whereas before it was kind of like, well, it failed in this set. I tested 1 other or 2 other ones in that set, and they're good to go. All right, well, I'm back sampling. And you may actually kind of continue sampling, just knowing you have to sort of address that one set. So I kind of like this. It kind of says, all right, pump the brakes. We failed a duct test. We got to do a few more of these duct tests, to make sure that this was an aberration. This was a one-off before we start picking up and going again. Is that right?
Yeah, you kind of run into 2 scenarios, right? It's one what I call the Friday at 3 is like something was supposed to be done. It's Friday 3 o'clock. They just didn't do it. Or
yes, beer o'clock, man. Yeah, I know how that goes.
Right. Or is this a design flaw? This is kind of chronic throughout. We just hit something that's going to hit all this unit type out of all the buildings going forward. So what are we dealing with here? And that's kind of what this is about. It's really a pause. You don't want to, I think the older way of failures was just to keep testing or proving the point that you failed indefinitely. You didn't really achieve anything. And if you got insulators, sheetrockers standing outside the units, then you're kind of in a precious situation. So this is kind of bide your time, because we know multi-family, It's slow until it's super fast. It's go, go, go. And we want to kind of know, is this, what are we dealing with here? What's the situation? And how do we address it? And so obviously you're not going to keep testing apart just to prove the point. It's what do we do? What's the scope of the issue? And how do we resolve? How do we have to elevate this? Is this on the guy, just as you said, pull the guy in and let's fix this one unit? Or is it crap, we've got to change a whole lot of stuff? Do we have to get the owners involved? What are we dealing with? So that's really the essence of it. You don't want to just keep, I think we can get away with it on this unit and test another 3, because then you've gone from sampling to testing everything pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's a little bit, I think the previous version was a little bit gamey in that regard. I think you could sort of mask maybe more systemic failures, through that process. So I kind of like this. Matt, what about you? Is there anything that stands out to you in this that you think that raters should really be paying attention to?
Well, I think this brings up one of the snags that a lot of raters have, is that they've bid this project a year or two ago, and now they're in the units actually doing it. And so when they're actually looking at the plans and bidding this thing, that's one of the things that verified set, that practice set, can avoid failures down the road. And paying attention pre-drywall really avoids those failures down the road, because one of the things that I learned early in this process is that you can't plan on having no failures. You have to plan on having failures and build that into your quote for when you're doing the job, and build in something that says additional failures will incur additional fees. Because if you start having failures down the road, now all of a sudden you could end up doubling the amount of field work that you're doing, and it can end up costing you a lot of money. So you have to build in those failures, just like you have to build in the fact that you're going to need a QA on one of these things. If you have more than 100 units in this thing, and sometimes like the NYSERDA projects and others, they have QA requirements for an individual project. So doing this number of units is going to up the amount of QA that you're going to need, and paying for QA is an expense. And so, that's something that raters have to keep in mind, that, failures are really affecting the bottom line unless you've built that into the quote ahead of time. And especially if you've got a new builder who has never done sampling before, maybe they've never done Energy Star before, you can count on failures and need to build it in, because otherwise it really affects your bottom line. As a one-man show, when I was doing it, was, if I had to go back out and retest something, it was just, my time. But as I grew and I was paying guys to go out and test things, now all of a sudden I can't retest for free because I've got money out of pocket going out there. So failures are something that you really need to try to head it off and plan for it by covering your butt on the quote.
Well said. Yep.
Paul, what do you think about applying sampling for pre-drywall verification measures? Y'all a fan of that, or would you rather just verify those features?
Sampling insulation, air sealing, we do that. We have to do it on the scale of our projects. So personally, we're invested in that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I always did 100% pre-drywall, because the problem with the old way of doing sampling, of course, is that you would have a sample set for pre-drywall, and those same units that are in that sample set are not necessarily going to be the same ones that you're going to test at final. So you're going to have separate sample sets at final, which means that you're doing a duct leakage test on a unit that you probably didn't look at in pre-drywall. And that's where you start getting into that failure scenario. And so I always did 100% pre-drywall, and then did my sampling just for the final, because I didn't want to get into a unit to do the blower door test, duct leakage test, ventilation test, if I hadn't put my eyes on it pre-drywall. And I think it just made sense. Even hundreds of units in a building, the way that the projects I was working on, they would do them by floor. So they would have all these crews working on an entire floor, and then they would move down to the next floor, and you could walk in, and you could walk from unit to unit through the common walls. So it was just easy to just walk right through units and be able to look at everything. So yeah, and in this new standard, if you do 100% pre-drywall, then you can easily take units out and call them confirmed. For whatever reason, you might want to take a couple of units out. If you did 100% pre-drywall, you have the flexibility in this new standard to be able to just say, okay, I'm going to take this unit out and I'm going to call it confirmed for my QA, or for whatever reason, because this is one the manager is going to move into tomorrow and I need to get the certificate for it. Or if it's just a one-off, double unit on the corner, yeah, you can pull that out and make it confirmed because you did pre-drywall. But if you didn't do 100% pre-drywall, you can only take that unit out if you you verified all the minimum rated features. And if you didn't look at like the wall insulation, you're going to be calling it grade 3. Well, then it can't be Energy Star. So yeah, I think doing 100% pre-drywall when you can gives you a lot more flexibility.
I actually that's really genius, Matt. I'm glad that we stumbled upon this, because I think that's a catch that most people wouldn't have caught. Because why would someone maybe want to pull out a unit and call it confirmed instead of sampled? It could be a timing thing. It could also be, it passed whatever program threshold we're trying to get, but maybe it doesn't meet maybe like a utility threshold or something like that. And so there's really no value in keeping it within the sampling process. It's just easier to pull it out. So let's just say, for a utility program, we needed to get a 0.25 CFM50 per enclosure area. Energy Star requires 0.3. And so we tested at 0.28. Well, it passes Energy Star, but it maybe doesn't meet this threshold for a utility program. Okay, instead of causing that to be a failure within sampling and triggering extra testing, I'm going to pull that one out. I'm going to call it confirmed. And then that way it will still meet Energy Star, but it's not going to kind of penalize me in the sampling process for all the rest of the units. Again, that's a tracking thing. It may just be easier to get out a caulk gun and run around, with a caulk gun for a few minutes and try to tighten it up. But regardless, that's an option. But it's only an option, to Matt's point, if you actually did 100%, or at least that unit you definitely observed at pre-drywall, which is less of a guarantee if you sampled pre-drywall. I've always been a little bit skeptical of sampling at pre-drywall because I just feel like the juice isn't worth the squeeze, I kind of feel like the amount of time savings that you get out of it, you're going to be tracking down that many things. And I think especially with this, I think you're going to be tracking that many more things.
The time saved in the field is going to be lost in the tracking, sitting in the office, making the spreadsheet and everything. Yeah. To me, it was just faster to just walk from unit to unit and look at all of them instead of trying to sit down and create a sample set and all that for pre-drywall. Yeah, the time saved in the field was wasted in the office. I mean,
it gives you that flexibility to kind of choose what's, because that might be great for one project, but it may not work for the next project. So you have the flexibility. Just skipping back, there are some caveats to that. If you're going to pull a unit out as confirmed, there's language that you have to know which unit it's going to be, and I think you need to that will readjust your sampling rate. You don't minimize it. You never go below that 20%. So if you pull that one out, you got to add another one in.
Okay, but yeah, still, but yeah, I mean that's fine. But you don't have to add 3. You can add one more, not 3 more.
But it's based on the percentage, is what the standard says. So yeah, if you took 10% of the units out, you're supposed to add 10% back in. Yeah.
And the idea is you're kind of upfront about that, and that's kind of that reminded me of the other point is that you have to apply for sampling now at RESNET. You have to kind of announce upfront.
Very good point. Yeah. And you have to do it to RESNET, not to your provider, but to RESNET. Now it may be you applying to your provider and your provider advising RESNET, but RESNET wants to know about these sampling plans ahead of time. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Being on the RESNET board and having a pretty good idea of their budget and their staffing capability, I'm not, it may be a nice file folder there with your sample plan. Maybe they'll hopefully have somebody who can take a look at it and give you some feedback, but yeah, Paul, continue on. That is kind of a bigger new change.
Yeah, it's really just so let RESNET know that up front that this project is going somewhere. I think the intent here was, kind of, you mentioned, Chris, there's a lot of ways to game the older system, the old program, and this was one where people would like, oh, well, we're doing this, we missed, we're going to inspect 100%, but we found out, oh, we're not meeting thresholds, and let's just call this project sampled after the fact because we failed and we didn't address those failures correctly. So there's, forget about those failures, let's just call it sampled, which happened, I guess, quite enough that we felt, let's include that in this, so we kind of head that off. If you have to declare your intention that this is a project being sampled from very early.
I'm with you. This is kind of like, we would see it, the Raider was, the project was getting kind of long in the tooth and maybe a little bit over budget for the Raider. It took a long time. And then they're like, well, we were going to test all of them, but let's try to get that sampling done. And then all of a sudden, BER, we never heard anything about this project. And all of a sudden it shows up as sampling. And then if it wasn't really done right, they're like, oh, I just thought I had to test 1 and 7. That was it. Like, no, like there's a process and there's a qualifying set and there's failures have to be treated. So yeah, I like the fact that I think it's almost like this is the standard obligating people to do an intellectual exercise of how are you going to go through the sampling process ahead of applying the sampling process, instead of just sort of winging it and then, showing up to your provider and saying, hey, was this good enough? So.
And I think it's not much of it. It's really just an announcement that you send in the project name. There's not a lot that you have to send into RESNET. It's really just saying, yeah, we intended this project's going sampling. Check the box. That's pretty much all they requested.
I hope, and I encourage any provider out there to ask your raters to actually do the intellectual exercise, do the work, think through how you're going to apply it, because I think otherwise people are just kind of winging it. And look, we're all smart people until we do dumb stuff, and I think having a good plan ahead of time, think about how professional the plans are for projects like this. And yet there are still issues. And here we are, I think sometimes as raters, maybe we're a little bit arrogant. Maybe we show up and we just like, we don't need a plan. We can just show up and do it because we're smart building scientists. Mm-hmm. You know what, folks? Think about, that big 1,100 page PDF that you have to comb through for, a building that's being built, along with the 500 page spec manual, and a lot of people are having to do a lot of planning in order to build these buildings. I think the idea that we show up a little bit more prepared with our approach is a good thing.
Yeah, and working with the architect and everything ahead of time, looking at all of this stuff that's in the plan. Because I can't tell you how many multifamily plans I've looked at that were Energy Star and they hadn't addressed like mechanical ventilation or kitchen ventilation, some critical things that have major implications for a big building. You can't have penetrations in firewalls. How are you going to get that kitchen range hood vented to the outside when it's a common wall inside that you can't penetrate?
Well, Matt, didn't you hear they decided to VE that kitchen exhaust? It's kind of expensive. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation, Paul and Matt. I really appreciate y'all being on the BERcast. Just to remind people, voluntary compliance date for this January 1st, 2024. Mandatory compliance date July 1st, 2024. Actually, we changed it. Maybe. We had an appeal from some of our raters here at BER that said, we signed contracts for these projects, oftentimes a couple of years before they're even going to be really designed and submitted for permits. So the rater has already kind of bid the job, and they already bid the job kind of based off of the old standard. The way that this was written, was basically saying, hey, projects permitted as of July 1st, 2024, you're going to end up having to do, you're going to have to do this new standard. Again, that sounds good on paper. Hey, it's a better standard. We're excited to do the new thing, but the problem is if you bid this job in 2023 with the expectation that you were going to test and verify X number of units, and that was part of your quote, well, that job that was bid in 2023, they may not finish design and pull permits until 2025. That's pretty standard. Paul, am I right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, based off of some concerns from some of BER's raters, we pushed back. I pushed back for y'all. I asked, hey, look, this is a great thing to do, but nobody is exactly forcing us to do it. No external body is saying, hey, RESNET, you have to clean up your sampling standard. It's a mess. It's an embarrassment. Nobody was really saying that. We chose to do it because we chose to make it better. So I said, since we're not really under the gun externally, why don't we give ourselves a little bit more of an on-ramp? So I made the appeal, made the case, and the Standards Management Board voted to move the mandatory compliance date for Addendum 46 to July 1st, 2025.
Look at Chris McTaggart going to bat for the Raiders.
Boom! Boom! Just for y'all, because I know that it matters to y'all. And I got that feedback, and so I pushed it. I said, hey, it's a good idea. Don't get me wrong. And this is not to undermine or denigrate the work by people like Paul or Emily Cuppernell or all the other people that worked on it. It's an improvement. I think that this standard is genuinely an improvement, but I'll say it's quite a bit different. The announcement of this change wasn't necessarily great from RESNET. It took a while to organize like a webinar to really talk about it, and it does impact contracts. And so basically, it sounds like there's some things that need to be double checked with sampling in 301 and how that impacts Addendum 46. But for all intents and purposes, the mandatory compliance date, it sounds like, is going to be pushed off a year. Now, again, the voluntary compliance date is already now. You can do it now. There's nothing wrong with that. And so if you have a company that is ready to take this on and you think it's going to make more sense for your company, you can do it now. Paul, how do you feel about that? I know I just kind of dropped a bombshell here. You all right with that?
Oh, perfectly. Yeah, no, anything that kind of eases into it and gets people on board with it and familiar with it, I'm all for it. I think at the end, looking down the road, the whole intent of this is to make everyone's life easier, and anything we can do in that regard, I'm all for. If it's done, if it's simpler and easier, then people are going to be more likely to do it, hold to it and do it right, which is the ultimate.
And it raises the confidence level that the units that are not tested are meet the thresholds and stuff, because it's all sampling is all about raising the confidence level of the units that were not tested, and by doing more of them, we're increasing that confidence level. And so I think this is an easier sell also to, for example, local code officials. You might be dealing with a local code official on a multifamily project who wants every single unit blower door tested. Well, if we have an ANSI approved standard that has a confidence level that we can go to the code officials and say, hey, we have this particular standard that we have confidence that even though we're not testing those units by our sampling protocol, by the way we handle failures and the verified set, the qualified set, we have all of these measures in place in order to ensure that we're still meeting the standards. And in my experience, code officials will look at that and say, yes, I'll accept that for code compliance on my local level.
Yeah, glad you mentioned. Yeah, that was another big. We talked to a lot of code officials in the early days of this to see what they wanted, because they're not very sampling friendly. So we wanted their input. They obviously wanted a much higher sampling rate and more rigorous, and that was kind of what drove this. Because I think, again, part of the history of this was to get this as an ANSI standard by itself, which hasn't evolved yet, but maybe it will. But definitely some code input. to make it more rigorous. But something you said back then, it jogged my memory. It's not so much. It's also more testing, but there's language that it's through the life of the project. It's not let's go and do all our testing up front, get it over and done with, and then forget about the rest of the building. There's language in there to kind of make sure the sampling's done through the life of the whole project, that you're out there repeatedly, that you go into it. Yeah, if there's multiple buildings, you have to go to each building at least once. And, you want to, over the life cycle of the building, be there at the beginning, be there at the middle, and be there at the end. Because in my experience, the end, when projects are turning over, is when things start getting derailed, because they're changing over crews. And the GC you've been working with is pulled off to another site, and you've got a new GC coming on site. So you're basically starting again. So you definitely want to, in the first version, we had about 3 pages of how to kind of manage that kind of situation, which was a bit too much, to be honest.
Yeah. Like you said, by going by feature, you could potentially be hitting a lot more units in the building.
Yeah, you're more of a shotgun instead of a shotgun effect, scattered effect. So the flip side of that is a bit more detailed in your tracking, but the end result is a better product that we're delivering at the end of the day.
Yeah, more confidence.
Yeah, right on. Well, so I'm happy. We're moving in the right direction. We're getting more thoughtful about our approach to sampling. I'm just going to go out there and say, and I'm going to be alone on this, but I don't think we should necessarily have to discontinue sampling on single family either. I think we could get smarter with it. Better tracking, better accountability. But regardless, that's sort of above my pay grade for right now. But, we will look forward to be working with our raters, I know, over the next year, basically, to get them prepared for this, because, they can do it right now. But we're going to be pushing that back due to your old buddy, Chris Mack. And we'll see come July 1st, 2025, as this really rolls out, how it is working for people at that time. Paul, maybe we'll have you back. I appreciate you coming on, though, buddy. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we are working.
Matt, good to have you on too.
Good, thank you. And we are working on an FAQ document. So if bear raters do have questions on these, submit a ticket, and we're answering these questions. And I'm creating an FAQ document that will be available very soon, for all of the little nuances and stuff in this. So yeah, we're staying on top of it.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks, fellas. We'll talk to you later. Okay, going into segment 3, again, I don't have Sandy here. He is busy on the road, flying around the country, representing BER and selling our wares. Love that guy. Appreciate that he's doing that yeoman work on behalf of good old Building Efficiency Resources. We are known for bantering about our opinions on what is going on in the world of sports. And so, I'm just going to go ahead. Last time we had picked it up, Sandy and I were talking about what was going on in the world of sports and looking at the NBA playoffs. They were just kind of kicking off. And we're all the way to the finals. Finals begin today. By the time you all hear this episode, games 1 and maybe even 2 will be in the bag. We've got the Boston Celtics, 17-time NBA champion Boston Celtics, against the Dallas Mavericks, which, Boston was the number 1 seed. They've been the best team in the league all year. So it wasn't a big surprise to see them coming out. We kind of predicted that was going to happen. Sandy, he had a pretty good run with his New York Knickerbockers, but wow, they lost the Pacers in 7 games. Unfortunately, but too many injuries caught up with them. What can I say? New York, it's not really a place that's known for basketball anyways. You gotta have at least 3 NBA championships for you to be considered to be like a serious basketball city. So, that would take you to places like, Los Angeles, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco with Golden State, San Antonio, Miami, and Detroit, baby. That's right. The Pistons, 3-time NBA champs. New York, 2 chips. Last time, what was it, like the 1970s or something like that? Good grief. What are we even talking about? Anyways, Boston made it out of the East. Surprise, surprise, not to anybody. Dallas is really the story here. And I'm just going to go out and say, I think that Dallas has taken this. I think that they have the momentum. I think that they have a team environment right now that is going to propel them to do some things that are very surprising. Now, look, I may eat my words because Boston's been the team to beat all year long, but they've never proven that they can get it done when it counts the most. Jason Tatum, look, he's great, but he's never been able to close when it counted the most. Now, the one person I will say, there's a couple of people who are really going to help out Boston this series. Number one, Jaylen Brown has been really their savior in the big clutch moments. He is the one that really ensured that they kind of got over the hump in a few of these series. So, Jaylen Brown, without a doubt, he's playing up to his huge contract. But I will also say having Jrue Holiday, to me, makes them very formidable because he is an NBA champion. He won a championship as the starting point guard with Milwaukee a handful of years ago. Now he's a bench guy. That's a pretty serious player to be coming off your bench. Somebody with, NBA credibility, is a defensive stopper, and he can shoot, and he can play make. Kristaps Porzingis maybe coming back, former Maverick. That's a little bit of a storyline there. But I got to be honest, Kyrie Irving is an NBA champion as well. And I feel like he is on a mission to sort of reclaim his image. For a few years, Kyrie was focused on whether the earth was round or flat, and he kind of jumped around from team to team after Cleveland. He demanded a trade out of Cleveland. So he went to Boston and kind of flamed out there and ended up going to the Nets and the Brooklyn Nets. They were supposed to be the new super team, KD, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. And that didn't work at all. So here he is in Dallas. And in some ways, when he joined Dallas, it was kind of like, man, is this guy's last opportunity? And I think that he took that seriously. And so you've got him who's, a kind of refocused, re-energized superstar. And then you got Luka Doncic, who is making the case for him being the best player in the league. So, the way I'm looking at it, you got somebody who is arguably maybe the best player in the league, the most clutch player in the league currently in Luka. You've got Kyrie, who has put a team on his back and won a championship before, and then you've got a lot of role players that are sneakily doing really well. I think that if Dallas is going to have a hard time, that's where the problem is going to be, is are their role players really good enough to be able to really, Boston is just a complete team, so I'm still going for Dallas. I'm going to go for Dallas in 6 games. And that's a bold prediction, but I think that they have the momentum. My folks from Massachusetts, I know I'm going to get panned for this, but again, I'm a bad boy. I'm from Detroit. I'm not trying to, give Boston and Celtics any credit here. Y'all are going out. You're going to lose in 6 games. Calling it. All right, moving on to the Stanley Cups. We're in the Stanley Cup. It's kicking off here in a couple of days. We've got the Edmonton Oilers against the Florida Panthers. And look, again, I'm not a big hockey guy. Sandy's New York Rangers went out again. New York, not really known as a hockey town. again, big hockey towns. You got Montreal, you got Boston, you got the Blackhawks, you got the Maple Leafs, and you got the Red Wings. You know what? New York's got 2 teams. They don't got as many Stanley Cups as what the Red Wings got. So I hope Sandy appreciates me laying it on thick because he can't be here to defend himself. That's too bad, Sandy. You could have been here, but you chose not to be. So I'm laying it on thick. Who's going to come out on this? Why don't we go for Canada? I'm going to go for these Edmonton Oilers because, why in the hell not? I don't know why. It doesn't seem like you should be playing hockey in Florida, and you should be playing it in Canada. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call it for Edmonton in a 4 games sweep of the Florida Panthers because, Florida's got bigger fish to fry. Y'all got to quit killing your Panthers down there. You only got a handful of them left. So let's start focusing on this, and then you can get back to hockey once we make some progress elsewhere. That's all I got for you right now. Running my mouth, throwing some shade at my man Sandy, but he can come back and fire back at me when he's ready. But for now, we're going to call that a wrap on the BERcast.